I'm really up against it tonight. There's a storm rolling through, Storm Amy. It's about to hit now in the next few hours. But in the meantime, I just want to do a quick book review. It's about John O'Driscoll on duty. He's a former assistant commissioner. He retired there a couple of years ago, about a year ago, and he wrote his memoirs. I found it a fantastic book, very enlightening, and very insightful. Very, very insightful. So to start with, he comes from a family of guards. His father joined the Garda Taka way back in 1941. That was the Reserve Garda force during the emergency years. His brother is also in the force. I believe he's retired also as well. But one of the main motivations for him to join the Guards was way back in 1974, May 1974. And at the time, his father was a detective superintendent, and it was the time of the UVF bombings in Dublin and in Monaghan, and to see to witness his father coolly and calmly going into that investigation, it inspired him to get involved with it. And sure enough, the reason that he remembers that the reason that his father was so cool going into that investigation was on account of the fact that in the 40s the German Luftwaffe actually bombed Dublin, and so when the bombs were going off in 74, his dad was recognized and was two steps ahead really in terms of how to go about investigating and guarding. So he joined in 77. He did 6 months in Templemore. It's supposed to be a 12-monther, but at the time he could only do 6 months of it. But he ended up going to Fitzgibbon Street as a Garda. Fitzgibbon Street in Dublin, of course. He notes that in the 80s there was a level of crime, but it was not nearly as serious as it is today, mainly on account of the fact that heroin was out on the streets, and cocaine hadn't actually arrived in Ireland and Dublin yet. In his time there in Fitzgibbon Street, he also became a detective sergeant. He learned all about crime scene investigation, and one of his notable experiences there was letter tracking, where people were writing malicious letters about their neighbors, and he would have to detect who was doing it. And as it turned out, it would be somebody the family would know, and it was just done out of the fact that that person had nobody to turn to. They were afraid to go to the police about an issue, and instead what they do is they'd write a malicious letter to their neighbor, and it could have been something as simple as the neighbor's son kicking a ball against a wall that sparked it off. So it just shows that back at the time, like, the guards were seen as hardy or heavy kind of people that you didn't want to get involved with unless it was very serious. So there was that definite distinction, or a gap between community and policing at the time. He did some time in Rathangan in Kildare, and then he switched over to Store Street. Store Street Garda Station. It covers Temple Street, Gardner Street, Sheriff Street, and Dominic Street in Dublin. And in the book, he says that, like, the public perception of those streets was that it was unsafe. But he maintains that, like, it was well policed at the time. However, given the fact that this was in the 80s and the 90s, and when addiction was rising quite fast, even more so now that cocaine had made it onto the scenes, that there was a lot more crime on the street, in terms of addicts trying to get their next hit. He also notes that there was poor relationships between the guards and the community as well. He talks about the high crime rate as heroin transferred to cocaine, which was translating into drug-related crime. There was a definite distinction there. When there was no drugs on the streets, the crime was very low, and then suddenly heroin and cocaine comes on the streets, and the communities are very are hit with it. It also round about that time as well, you had the gangland culture, where people within their communities would start pushing drugs, and because it was such a lucrative venture, people in those communities would be making a lot of money out of it. Um, but all a lot of that was down to the fact that people in the community would not talk to the guards about it. Basically, there was no lines of communication between the guards and the communities at the time. So in chapter 3, winning back the community, over the course of 94 to 98, we see progress insofar as he describes the situation in the city, in the inner city, as basically there's a lot of unemployment, there's not much opportunities, and there's not much resources available for communities. And as a result of that, the drugs seem to be the only logical solution for people to get busy and to get money and to get successful. So as a result of that, the communities were getting were being falling apart slowly, as on account of the fact that everybody knew the drug pushers. Everybody was watching the addicts as they slowly fell down the slippery slope and dying, and a lot of elderly in the community were watching their younger families being buried. So as a result of that, there was volunteer projects, and one of them was the Inner City Organizations Network, or ICON projects. And John O'Driscoll, he himself and other guards were invited to go to these meetings, the ICON meetings, where they would get in touch with the likes of Tony Gregory, who was TD for Inner City Dublin, and they would talk about what was going on in the communities, what was going wrong, and through those talks, the guards were able to target raids on different drug pushers. There was a job there they did on St. Joseph's Mansions, where they did a raid early in the morning. They'd go into the mansions and they'd snap up anybody who was doing drugs or dealing drugs, or in the process of that crime. But John, he observes that, like, even when they do those operations, they have to be mindful of the fact that there's lots of ordinary citizens living and working in those areas as well, and it's important that they should feel safe and reassured that they're not going to get involved with it, because the problem was that people who could afford to get out of the inner city got out, but the people who couldn't were stuck there. And it was important to reassure them that they weren't fighting a losing battle in that corner. And so as a result of that, he talks of operations in the drugs units. There was like mock junkies, guards under who would be mock junkies, basically would be people to catch out the pushers as well. And also that the guards did regularly attend community events and give a visible presence to the community, and to show up at various meetings for the community, and open the Garda organisation to the voluntary communities to get more information on how to fight crime. As a result of the murder of Veronica Guerin as well, the government ramped up resources available to the guards and to the projects as well. Um, on account of the inner city organizations network, on account of those meetings, a lot of solutions that weren't available at the time would be on the table, and they would be open for discussion. So when a tragedy like the murder of Veronica Guerin happened, and the government was under pressure to bring in change, those guards and those voluntary projects would have the solutions, and they'd have them ready, and they were just waiting for resources to come down the pipeline for them. So as a result of that, um, it, instead of a knee-jerk reaction, instead they were able to focus not on the problem, that is the gangsters, but the results of the problem, the addicts. By providing more resources for the communities that have no resources, but providing more opportunities for the communities with no opportunities, and by reassuring those communities, it was far better, because then the communities would lift themselves up out of that trap, and so there would not be a need for the drug pushers to be selling their trade. And that was one way. That I like that one way of doing it. Of course, the guards were doing it the other way as well, dismantling the crime groups as well. But it's nice to see that there's two sides to that problem. It's all about building the communities. And another observation that we're making was the fact that the pushers themselves were well known in their communities, and it was really hard for people living in the community to watch these pushers, these gangsters, going around in their nice cars and going on holidays and living the luxury lifestyle, and at the same time they're burying their own members of the community. Young people are just literally living for a short while and ending up in the grave. So it was really hard on them. The likes of Filoni, Cronin and Dunn, these were drug pushers in that particular area. The guards were able to pressure them. They were able to seize their assets. But on top of that, the community was up in arms as well. And around that time, in 95, 96, there was a lot of community marches and checkpoints, voluntary checkpoints being set up in different parts of different communities around Dublin. And it reminded him of the fact that one of the first reasons, or one of the earliest guards, were called watchmen. And watchmen were basically people who would just stand at a post and watch what was going on, track what was going on in their area, and either report it to the people to deter that. But the purpose, the underlying purpose of a guard is to track and monitor, and make aware what's going on in that community, so that they can deter it. Now, the thing about the community marches was that it started slowly becoming more and more violent, and it came to a head there around 1996, where you had Tala Against Drugs, which was a community watcher, and they took it a little too far, and the guards got involved, and a riot ensued, and there was an awful lot. It started bringing up the wrong side of watching and community development. So O'Driscoll, he went out, and he was able to. He knew a couple of people that were in those riots, and by discussing with them, they agreed that they'd have a big meeting about it. And when they did, it was a huge meeting. Apparently, there was hundreds in the hall willing to voice their opinion about what had happened, and discuss and give their views. and it was he did find it, he did observe that like it was a very uncomfortable meeting for the guards present, to explain what had happened from their point of view, and not only that, but to listen to everybody else's views. And that just reminds me, getting back to the time with the malicious letter writers. You know, there was an awful lot of people in those communities that really wanted to just have their voice heard, and that's what those meetings did. It gave voice to those communities, and the guards were there to listen and to take it all in and start coming up with solutions. So in terms of the likes of those drug dealers like Cronin, he died. He was killed. Filoni went to prison, and Dunn, he also died. Drug dealers did not have a long shelf life back in those days. There was a lot of successful operations on account of the communities helping the guards. Drug units were able to act on them a lot more effectively, and up until 1999, the John he left he left Store Street, and he joined the Garda National Immigration Bureau. But he leaves it with that point that, like, at that stage, the link between community and policing was established, and on account of that, communities are getting safer, and I can only imagine they have gotten progressively better since. So starting into immigration, early back in it's always been the guards' duty to police the borders and to deal with immigration. And way back in the 90s, they called it the Aliens Office, but now it's called the Garda National Immigration Bureau, and it's based in Harcourt Square. But just to give you an idea of the numbers that they had to deal with back in the 90s, immigrants coming into the country was about 12,500. By 1999, it had gone up to 17,000. By 2001, it was 30,000. And by 2005, it was 135,000. And there's three different categories of migrant coming in. You have the people who qualify for work visas. You have people that qualify for student visas, and then you have the asylum-seeking refugees. And to give you an idea of the asylum-seeking refugees, back in 1992 there was 39 of them. In 1995 there was 400 of them. In 1998 there was 5,000, and by 2000 there was 10,000. And how does the guards police this? Now, they have laws, legislation that define who can come into the country and who cannot. Okay. On top of that, there's 15 points of entry. There's the ports and there's the border, and thirdly, they have two options. They can either refuse leave to land, where if somebody comes through customs and they're stopped by the guards, then they're refused to come into the country. And the other option is to deport them, where the migrant is already inside the country. The guard is then, through whatever reason, has to deport them, take them out of the country, basically. And it's the Garda National Immigration Bureau. It's their job to seek out non-genuine asylum seekers. Okay, so out of the 100,000 a year, it's normal now in Ireland that over 100,000 people are coming into the country. So it's up to the GNIB to actually process them and decide and figure out, are they genuine? And what do they define as not genuine asylum seekers? They're migrants that come in with bogus documentation, like a fake passport. nationality swapping, where they're from Turkey, but they're claiming that they're Ukrainian. You know, the identity swapping, or the use to children as legislation. For example, there was a time there where women were coming in to the country, and they were days before going into labour, and the reason that they were making that dangerous journey into Ireland was so that their child could claim citizenship, and therefore they could claim citizenship. But the way it works, the legislation changes all the time, and there was different forms of legislation. You had the 1996 Refugee Act, okay, which defined our international obligations to take in people, refugees. And then you also had legislation in 1999, 2003, 2004. It's ongoing legislation. It's constantly being updated. And there was a couple of incidents there where, for example, there was bogus marriages. The registrar, the general registrar for marriages, had spotted that there was a sudden jump in marriages, and they did an inquiry into it, and they realized that there was these marriages were being done by non-European migrants, where one is valid and the other one was due for deportation. And so they realized that there was a loophole in the law there, and until they fixed that loophole, literally guards would actually go into the marriage ceremonies and object to the marriage itself, because a lot of those marriages, like, they didn't even, the husband or the bride didn't even know who the groom was. So those loopholes, they have to be cleaned, fixed out, and thankfully I'm pretty sure a lot of those loopholes have been fixed since. It's also up to the GNIB to have a humane, fair and sensitive system going. And in fairness to them, they've been doing this since 1992. They've been doing it since 1992. So they know there's a system there. They know what needs to be done. And if the guards are failing in any way in terms of the immigration strategy, it's because they must not be getting enough resources to deal with it. Also in the book, he covered the incident that happened in Wexford back in 2001, where a container containing people in it was found in Wexford, and out of the 13 people, 8 had died. 4 of them were children, and what happened there was that particular container was loaded with furniture in a town outside Milan. It was shipped to Zeebrugge in Belgium, I think it is, and from there, they reckon what happened was that was where the smugglers put them in the container and sealed the container, put a couple of air holes into it, and they thought that the container was actually going to the UK, so they had planned for about 50 hours inside in the container, but instead the container was actually going to Waterford, which was 101 hours. So it goes into great detail of the horrific journey those people had to go through, and the conditions that they had to live with in that. When that container was finally opened, and the people that survived it were able to give their stories to the guards, it was then up to the guards to get in contact and find the relatives, and they found that most of them were from Turkey, and they also were able to touch base with Belgian police and to find out who they were, who orchestrated this horrible event. And the Belgian police arrested over 6 people, and they were charged with manslaughter, trafficking, and involuntary assault. And the maximum number of years they got was over 10 years. The ringleader of that particular operation, he was Serbian, but he ended up absconding to Australia, and he didn't he went back to his wild ways, and he got involved with the crime gang over there, so he's doing 14 years in prison in Australia. Another issue about immigration that John talks about in his book, it's human trafficking in Ireland. It's there. um, um, one particular instance that he talks about is the child trafficking of children. In particular, he goes into detail about a group called the Peter Group. Peter Sarfo was I can't remember the nationality, but what they were doing was they were trafficking girls into and out of. But they caught Peter Sarfo in Dublin. They caught him in this country, but you know, that crime, that group operated in Europe as well, and so like he was Peter Sarfo. He was arrested in Ireland, but I think he did trial in the Netherlands. What else? A couple of at one stage as well, in 2000 and around 2002 2003, John O'Driscoll was stationed in Swinford as well, and a particular case came up in Ahamore, where an elderly man and his two sisters were living in a house. It's a tragic story. It's all about, and it covers the whole side of isolation and the need to look after the elderly in our community, and to be able to engage with them and to keep tabs with them. Because again, like for the guards to come in on those kind of cases, like they have to be very sensitive in dealing with family and dealing with the community. Also, he ended up going to Asia the time of the tsunami in Asia way back in 2004. John O'Driscoll was tasked with sending a team over to Phuket in Thailand, and there they had to locate dead and missing Irish people. The Department of Foreign Affairs would send them the information on who they thought was missing, and it would have been up to John and his team to go around to the various morgues and try to identify the right bodies and have them shipped home as well. Again, a real big exercise in dealing with dead people, and making sure that sensitivity and that appropriate respect can be shown, and a service to the Irish people. What else does he talk about? Just to sum up the whole immigration side of it, in his time he was 13-14 years in the Immigration Bureau, but his observations is that a lot of crime is interlinked. You have false documentation, you have labor exploitation, you've got sexual exploitation, you've got smuggling of goods and people and drugs and terrorism. There's links there in everything there. There's key people doing all these things, and it's just a matter of finding them, rooting them out and catching them. One issue that he also observed was for first generation migrants that do come here to Ireland, and the problems they faced is like, yeah, they've worked hard, they've done their work, but now they're finding that they're retired, and you know, they're not living in their own communities, and it's harder for them to integrate into our communities. So it leads to mental health issues for them as well later on. So it's vitally important that we do be aware that migrants, especially the ones that work long and hard in this country, that they should be respected just as much as the rest of us. Um, what else? The Dublin riots. Um, oh yeah. Um, Social media. He touches on social media and influencing in crime, and it's fake news. It's all these reports that we see on social media that are not true at all. And but it sways public opinion. It disrupts people's lives, and one of those instances where he spotted it was during the Dublin riots of 2023. I remember doing a podcast about this one about a couple of years back, actually, and basically, I can't remember why the riots started. However, observations by the guards back then was that it was an organised protest by outsiders, people from outside Ireland, were actually coming into Dublin and row rising, and they were deliberately instigating violence on the guards. And what they were doing was these people would go in, they get violent with the guards would respond, and those guys would literally melt into the crowd, start telling everybody that the guards are getting rough with everybody and whipping up a frenzy. And by riling up the crowd, then um, once the riot is fully ensued, those people literally just disappear out of it. Either if they're unfortunate enough to get arrested, but most times they got out of that scene altogether and just let the riot take over. And it's just a sign that, like, it's so easy to manipulate a mob, and and once you get stuck in that mob, groupthink tends to set in. I remember from that podcast, like I was complaining about the young people that like they were breaking into shops and they were stealing pairs of sneakers and clothing and all sorts of stuff. And the only reason that they did it was because everybody else was doing it. They didn't. Groups think sets in, and um, it riles you up because it turns out um, another section of the book he's talking about organized crime groups, particularly the Kinahan gang. For a start, there was an incident right in the Regency Hotel in Dublin. There was a boxing tournament, and there was a member of the Hutch gang at it. And what had happened was